Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's meditation. Lovely to see you all. Um, just to let you know, I'm in a kind of cabin in the garden right now, and there's a very unhappy cat just outside. So we may hear some cat noises. There's sometimes some disturbances from animals here, London animals, foxes and cats and so on. But we'll see. They can maybe be part of the picture. Yes, welcome. I'm Milla. I'm your meditation support person this week. And yeah, I'm here to share some ideas about comfort and discomfort. That's my theme. And the ways in which they can show up and maybe sometimes derail us from what we might want or what we might most truly value. And some ways to think about that, maybe some ways to practice with it. With a general overall, I guess, wish to find ways to be very, very fully and freely in the world, to be engaging with what really is, whether that's within us or outside us, whether that's our practice on the cushion or off the cushion, to be kind of fully and freely alive in the midst of it all, which is the engagement or the creative engagement of this kind of practice for me. And yeah, I really love the ways in which inner and outer work intersect and support each other and ask each other questions and so on. So I'm generally just really interested in that. Yeah. So one of the things I'd like to talk about today is ways to meet discomfort that's really helpful, I suppose. Helpful and useful and fruitful and nourishing. And I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what I went over the first couple of days to get us settled, and also because I'm aware there might be people joining for the first time. And then I'm going to look a little bit into ways to meet discomfort. And I'm genuinely interested in how this is for you, things you have found to be useful in the ways you meet discomfort or awkwardness or cognitive dissonance, any of these things that just kind of like, oh, something's a bit wrong, that kind of feeling when it shows up in your practice and your life. So I invite you, and I know this is a little countercultural in Sangha Live, but I invite you to make suggestions in the chat now, or as I'm talking, and then we can share kind of more widely, like between us as a group a little bit. So kind of bringing an element of your contributions in as well, but I totally understand that you might be very sleepy and in your pajamas and just starting the day, so not really available for that. But if you are, you're very welcome. All right. So on Monday, I spoke about the idea that discomfort is not necessarily bad. It can arrive sort of as a wrapper around things that are simply unfamiliar or maybe things that are challenging. And the idea that it's a natural part of experience, a natural part of processes like learning or intimacy or conflict or changing your mind, which are all part of living an engaged life and having an engaged practice. And in fact, many of the things that are kind of are wonderful in life sometimes are a little bit uncomfortable as well. So for me, it can be a really essential component of deepening on the path. So my argument that I'm making, I suppose, is that discomfort is useful and important, and learning to what I call the ultimate Jedi skill, to be comfortable with the experience of discomfort, to be less worried about it, less bothered, and certainly not derailed or directed by it, can unlock this whole set of destinations, this whole set of things that we might value in our lives. I have this image in my head of driving down a road and discomfort being like kind of speed bumps. And sometimes I can find myself like being directed by the speed bumps and like just going off down alleyways to try and avoid them. But actually, if I go over them, maybe it's not so bad. So then on Tuesday, I spoke about this idea of 3 paths of practice, that seeking comfort, as much as avoiding discomfort, can sometimes be a misdirection. The first path being the going away from the world path, the goal of transcendence, kind of underpinned by this idea of cosmological dualism, that there's somewhere else better to be, heaven or nirvana or an altered state or a deeper underlying reality that is more real or more attractive than this mess that we're living in. Incomplete, uncomfortable reality I'm surrounded by all day long. You know, much nicer to be in a kind of elevated spiritual state, a different kind of rarefied realm. So that can be a great relief, very comforting. You don't have to necessarily engage with anything because the world is just a shadow, or it's irredeemably sinful, or it's just the place where all the unenlightened beings are trapped. And it's very natural for things to be uncomfortable, but it's fine to turn away because all the good stuff is somewhere else. We'll get there eventually. Which is, really different to the engaged approach of being like, what is this? What's there? How is it to really be here in the midst of the mess and still be kind of showing up freely and fully, as Martin would have it? So that's one path that's different to what I call engagement or creative engagement, transcendent path. Someone has asked, what is the question? Thank you. Someone has replied. Yeah, what people have found helpful with discomfort, like ways of meeting it that feel useful, because I'm going to talk about that and it would just be ace to have some other suggestions, but no pressure. But what works for you, but essentially drawing on the wisdom of the group. Okay, so that was the transcendent path, the going away from, I don't like this, therefore I'm going to set my sights on a different reality that is actually more real and meaningful than this reality. Then the second path, which I think is also a path of non-engagement or less engagement, has a goal of frictionlessness, of accommodation, of kind of smoothing ourselves or changing ourselves so that we fit well with the world. And we kind of cope with the world. The classic example of this, actually, which comes up a lot in Ron Purser's work and his book McMindfulness, which is very good, is a corporate mindfulness program. Perhaps there is a corporate culture that is not so great. Perhaps the work is very difficult. Perhaps people are burning out, getting into conflict, becoming miserable, and so on. And the company introduces a mindfulness program so that the people in the business can soothe their unhappy, anxious feelings, thereby making it sort of their problem if they've got bad feelings. And that's actually part of this accommodationist path. It's always pointing the finger back at myself, like, I'm unhappy, it must be my fault, I must change myself. And while there, of course, is an element of that, and a lot of our work in Buddhist and Dharma practice is about kind of examining our patterns and our habits and our ways of adding unhappiness to our experience. Sometimes, of course, there is actually something wrong out there. And so becoming frictionless, changing ourselves so that we're no longer anxious about what's happening is not necessarily good. We reduce cognitive dissonance, But there are no problems because we believe there are no problems, not because there's no problems. And this is, what you could also call spiritual bypassing, using practice or using ideas from practice to put on rose-tinted glasses and sort of soothe away any discomfort by going into a kind of trance or zoning out. So you fit in with whatever's going on. Believing that the universe has a plan, so there's nothing you need to do. Also very comforting. Nothing to do. No discomfort to engage with. And if there is, it must be my problem. So all I need to do is kind of keep on beating myself with a stick and trying to make myself better and fix myself or zone out. So a different way, I think, of going away from what's truly there, and going away from the opportunity to sort of meet the world and meet our experience fully, and therefore understand and be part of the kind of the wonder of being alive. And that's what I call this third path, the path of engagement. Living fully and freely, being deeply and closely involved in what's happening, in what's really happening right now. And that does involve working skillfully with discomfort, because often there's discomfort. It might be wrapped around something, or it might just be showing up. Learning to work skillfully with it. So it might be a speed bump, but doesn't misdirect me. It might be part of my kind of committee that's showing up in my experience of the different voices saying what should be done or what's important, but I don't give it the keys and let it sit in the driving seat. All right. So that's my setup. But of course, the question is, well, how do we do that then? All very well to have this in theory, but what are some practical ways to kind of work with discomfort? So I have a small list, and I'm now going to look at if there's anything for us in the chat. Walking. Da, da, da. Get interested or stay curious. Without immediately feeling something's wrong and trying to change that. Feeling into the body. Brilliant. And where the discomfort shows up seems to be the most useful. Yeah. Noting it in the body and understanding it. And then you've mentioned parts from IFS therapy. I guess that's internal family systems, maybe. The idea, that's sort of what I was thinking about in terms of like having a committee or different voices. Yeah. Thank you. Walking. Neutralizing it. Interesting. There is a bit of Fleabag in everyone. Perfection is not possible in self or others. That's really brilliant. What I like about that is that it's that goes to the heart of this thing about expectations. That wasn't actually on my list, but it's something I've been really interested in. The idea that if discomfort can be like if our expectations are not met, whether or not we're conscious of them. And maybe our expectation is that everything will be perfect. I really like that. Using our farm to work against trad farming methods while still growing food. So yeah, engaging. 3 zones where we're comfy. Kate says 3 zones where we're comfy and safe. Green where we're comfy and safe, amber where we're not so comfy, and red where we experience overwhelm. The amber zone is called the growth zone. The aim is to get there from either green to safe and red to unsafe. Great. So noting perhaps in the body when and where we're not in the green zone, or we're not in the amber zone for whatever reason, and having a little bit of choice. I like that. So that needs awareness, and it needs kind of the range to be able to move between them, and then making the choice. Thing with corporate mindfulness. Should somewhat come. Okay, I'm getting a little distracted now, but thank you very much for all of your suggestions. And I will come back to them maybe towards the end or tomorrow. But anyway, I'll carry on sharing a little bit now before we have a sit. Thank you very much for all your suggestions, and please feel free to keep them coming. And leading on from them, and in many ways the same, I've got a few to share. It'll be a bit of a list, but hopefully there'll be something that kind of stands out for you that you can pick up and perhaps take into your practice today. Right. So I think there's two broad families of ways to work with or be prepared for discomfort. And the first is something that a lot of you have been pointing towards, which is what I put in the bucket of overall resourcing. So generally being nourished, looking after ourselves so that we're like we have a really solid base. And even if something does knock us, we're like, oh, whoops, I've been knocked, boing, and kind of able to come back to ourselves and to the, the kind, wise adult in us without too much fuss and quite naturally, like the idea, those rocking toys that you have. And so the resourcing is about kind of building up that weight, that groundedness. That's how I see it. And so we can find that in taking refuge, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, each one of those so rich for resourcing ourselves. And sometimes the practice can be about that. There's touching the earth in all its different forms. There's the individual nourishments that we find, like walking in nature, being with friends, taking part in kind of art, singing, good food, good company, all the things that we use to, not that we use, but that when we participate in, they fill us up. Working with our inner voices so that the general background noise we have in our inner dialogues are kind of kind. Again, practice can be part of that, not necessarily the whole thing. That's about kind of creating this really stable base. I'm going to go into some of those things a bit more tomorrow. There's also the kind of what we do actually in the moment when we're being knocked or when the discomfort is there and we're like, oh. And so for those things, I really like this framing that Martin has of meeting things with contact, curiosity, and care. So contact might be, as someone said, showing up for and meeting the experience of discomfort in the body. Like, where is it? What does it actually feel like? And taking a minute, rather than reacting or storytelling about it, to feel into it. It might be something you might do now with any feeling that you have. Doesn't have to be discomfort. Just saying, oh, where is that? Maybe what color is it? Is it moving? Is it big? Is it small? Is it hot? Is it kind of, what kind of feeling is it? How would you describe it in the body? And with this background noise of kindness, this sense of caring contact. And then adding an element of curiosity as well. Thich Nhat Hanh has this lovely thing of, oh, my little pain, I see you, my dear pain. What do you need? Oh, my dear discomfort, I have ignored you or squashed you for so long. I've never really listened to you. I'm listening now. What is it that you need? And then really listening to see what comes back. And I find this a really helpful approach, which is quite different to the kind of rumination or fixing type thinking. It's more going into a kind of empty, receptive state and just asking the question and seeing what happens. So I wonder what you need, discomfort. There's an idea from some therapeutic approaches that all of these voices or characters that might come up in our experience, including maybe the uncomfortable one, they're all trying to help us. They're trying to protect us. Maybe they're hangovers from early experiences where they were really useful and important. But maybe now all of their protection is a bit much. Maybe now they get to have a holiday. But it's hard for them to let go until they've really said what they want to say, and they can see that you're all right now, that you're an adult now. So sometimes asking, thanking, say, oh, thank you very much. I can see that you're trying to help. What is it that you need? What is it that you want to tell me? And then listening. So that's a kind of development a bit of this idea of contact, curiosity, and care. There's another one, which is simply not to make it worse. And this is the Buddha's idea of the second arrow. So the first arrow might be the initial dukkha, the initial, perhaps unavoidable experience. I mean, hopefully it's not an unavoidable experience being shot with an arrow, but it's in this metaphor, you get shot. And that's not anything you can do about. There's nothing you can do about that. But then the second arrow is when you kind of agonize about the fact that you've been shot, and you shoot a second arrow yourself into the back of the first one, which hurts even more. And that might be around kind of being outraged or by saying this shouldn't happen. And again, not really kind of meeting what's happening, but more fussing and fighting around it. So that's another approach. Then one which I quite like is to be, to kind of see it as a training and to sort of deliberately practice with discomfort. There's this idea of micro braveries. This is more to do with working with fear, but there's a woman, I can't remember her name now, but she's a firefighter in the States, and she wrote a book about courage or about bravery. I can't remember what word she used. And one of her kind of suggestions is to practice micro courage moments, kind of deliberately, to take little risks, to basically desensitize yourself a little bit. So one could do that also with discomfort. And some people do that, very deliberately, talking to strangers or, wearing a silly hat and walking down the street, not because they necessarily want to do either of those things, but just because they see the value in the kind of, their goal is to be comfortable with discomfort, I guess, so that it doesn't become a speed bump. And that's a way of doing it. Not saying you have to do that, but it's one approach. And then, yeah, I also wanted to say something about Brené Brown's work, but I think it's time to sit. So what I'll do is I'll add Brené Brown's work to the list of resources that I'm going to share at the end of the week. But it's very much a kind of a restating of some of these themes, understanding where the experience is in the body, being contactful and curious with kindness, and asking questions, essentially coming down to those ideas, just kind of framed in a different way, from her book Atlas of the Heart, which is all about understanding emotion and working with them. All right, I think that's enough talking from my side. Let's set up to sit, or practice in whatever format you're going to do that. Feel free to take a minute to make yourself comfortable. In your body. Finding a way to be grounded and solid, And at the same time, rising up from your groundedness. So both solid and light. Both connected and open. Finding the balance for you today between these poles. And I invite you to take your focus down to the places where your body is meeting the ground, where you're touching the earth, and connecting with that and with the extraordinary miracle of that interaction caused by gravity, which is still a mystery, I believe, and yet makes everything possible. An extraordinary wonder of just being able to be here in our bodies, in the world, in our lives, in our practice. Settling into that extraordinary reality, the experience of that that's arising right now in your own body, mind, heart. I invite you to take a couple of slightly deeper than usual breaths if you like. Settling into this experience. Opening and softening towards what's really going on. Connecting with whatever is really happening. And where possible, focusing or being with sensation and experience as much as or more than discursive storytelling mind. Taking your attention in and down into this extraordinary moment. And as experiences arise, whether they are welcome or unwelcome, feel free to experiment with meeting them with contact, curiosity, and care. Perhaps feeling what they're like in the body. Again, without necessarily too much narrative or reactivity, just noticing shape or color or location or sensation. Kind of getting interested in just that. With this steady embodied awareness. And if it's a feeling that seems very familiar or a very strong voice in your experience, maybe it needs a bit more attention than that. You could introduce one of these questions. My dear, I can see you. What is it you're trying to tell me? What do you need? I'm listening. Listening with the whole body. As we move towards the end of this practice period, I invite you to connect inwardly with your sanghas, connecting with all those people, past and present, maybe future, whose practice and commitment and love makes your world possible. Inviting a sense of gratitude to everyone in this network, seen and unseen, known and unknown, whose work and whose blessings and practice and commitment enable our practice to flourish today. Inviting a sense of gratitude and appreciation. Thank you for your practice. Please feel free to share any reflections or questions. As we come back together. I'm going to put the Dana link in the chat as well. If you would like to support the platform and everyone who works here and me, that's very much appreciated. Someone's asked about the book. Let me put it in the chat. Mindfulness. It was originally an article. There's also an article. And he also has a really brilliant podcast called The Mindful Cranks, where he asks these kinds of critical questions, like critical thinking questions about the ways in which practice is developing and whether it is good, the ways that it's developing. No problem, Doro. Thank you. Caroline said earlier, a lot of psychotherapy seems to be orientated towards an accommodationist view. I say that as a psychotherapist. Interesting. Yeah. The emphasis being on changing yourself. If you're unhappy, well, let's work on everything. Not that there's a problem with that, not that that's bad, but that's not the whole thing, right? Yeah. Interesting. Maybe there's a moment here I can tell you for this bit of Brené Brown that I ran out of space, felt like I was running out of space for before. This is the book, Atlas of the Heart. It's quite interesting. It's like an encyclopedia of emotions. And in her introduction, she talks about being a map maker and a traveler, and then sharing her thoughts along the way. And she says, human emotions are layers of biology, biography, behavior, and backstory. A lot to unpack there. But she basically then suggests an approach for each. So biology, understand how they show up in our bodies. Biography, getting curious about families and communities and how they have shaped our feelings about our feelings or our beliefs about our experience, our emotions. She calls that biography. Examining our go-to behaviors. So that's like, being aware of habits and responses and reactivity. And then thinking about the backstory, as in like what was the immediate cause of this emotion. Yeah, and then how do all those things interconnect? And her overall message is to look inwards, connecting inwardly, and with others. It's a pretty good book. It's full of great stories as well. Elizabeth says, I find the longing for comfort is deep and unconscious goal. Yeah, I agree. I'm really very comfort oriented in my life. And yeah, that's a good opportunity for me to respond and to that idea. Because I don't actually think that's bad. I don't think that's a problem. I think it's really understandable, in like pure evolutionary terms. I think the challenge is maybe if we give it the keys to the car in an unexamined way or an unaware way. So yeah, I really would be sorry if the way I'm talking about it all reinforces this idea that comfort is bad and this puritanical thing. I really hope that that doesn't come. That message is not being reinforced. I think comfort is wonderful, but just shouldn't be in the driving seat and shouldn't be the spiritual goal. Because a lot of what matters is so uncomfortable. So it's about, I guess, that playing with that creative tension. Working with comfort because we need it and it's lovely, and also understanding that not all good things are comfortable. Yeah, that's probably what I mean, actually. I probably should have just said that on Monday and then been quiet. Right. Let me see anything else. Inside Out, the film Inside Out. I read about that and I really want to see it. And there's another one, I think, Inside Out 2. They add a couple more characters. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a cartoon where this idea of having a kind of inner committee, like the scared one, the angry one, the sad one, the kind of rambunctious one, they all they're all characters within you, and the characters are really there. I think that's what the film's about. I'd love to see it. Alison said, it felt good to feel into my body where the hard, bumpy discomfort is. Hard and bumpy, great. And ask what it needed and give hot clamminess some love and comfort. Yeah, great, great. It's an interesting idea, isn't it? An interesting kind of twist to think that the unhappy feelings are unhappy, and like maybe they just need a cuddle and to be listened to. I find that very powerful sometimes. Okay. Vanya says, I know a few people who live with extraordinary levels of discomfort. Um, yeah. Can I ask a question, Vanya, before I respond, which is it physical pain? Because I think I'd respond really well, possibly respond differently if it is. Physical discomfort. Physical discomfort. Okay. So I'm not sure if that's pain or discomfort, what kind of level it is. Maybe you could say like if it's like really, really um if it's a really, really high intense level of pain. But let me see if I can respond helpfully. The road is made up of speed bumps with a few tiny gaps between the bumps. Yeah. So I think maybe it's hard for me to respond, not knowing enough, because we're not in the same room. Not because you haven't done anything today, but I think maybe the responses or the suggestions are the same, and the expectations are maybe different. So the road is made up of speed bumps with a few tiny gaps between the bumps. Contacting the discomfort can be excruciating. Yeah. So in that case, it's about, for me anyway, the balance of contact, curiosity, and care is maybe slightly different. So maybe it's more care and contact is much more titrated. So as much contact as feels useful, with a general ethic of care. Because if discomfort is very strong, or if it is pain, if it's physical pain and it's very strong, then yes, going into it can be too disturbing because that stimulus is just so strong. And then I think the expectations just have to be really different as to whether or not the discomfort will be transformed, whether or not it will go away, whether or not it can go away. And then for me anyway, not that I'm an expert in this, but it becomes more about the nourishment side, which can include distraction, of course. So all of the things, which I'm going to get into a bit more tomorrow, but we've seen a lot in the chat, and I mentioned briefly at the top, understanding what nourishes a person and making sure there's plenty of that as well, so that the discomfort is not the whole story, even though it's so present that it feels very much like the whole story a lot of the time. But yeah, I would say the focus more on care and more on nourishment, and not to kind of need to kind of white knuckle loads of contact when the stimulus is so strong that it's almost inescapable. Okay, Vanya says some more. Two autistic people who can't recognize a window of tolerance don't think they have one. Sensory overstimulation. Okay, interesting. I don't know much about it. But I think I'd probably say the same thing. To drop the worry about contact. If the capability is not really there, then there's not much point in kind of pushing it as if it were. But maybe there's tiny ways to do a little bit of exposure therapy, of tiny confidence building, comfort building experiments. But I'm really not an expert. Okay, so we're at time. I will just look at Elizabeth's question. I have a similar question about pain, frequent migraines. I'm sorry to hear that. A roller coaster emotionally and physically, hence my longing for comfort and ease. Yeah, and I think that's completely valid. As I said, like I think it's totally valid to long for comfort and ease and to seek it. So nothing wrong with that at all. You're not doing anything wrong. And I'm sorry to hear that. That sounds really challenging. I wish you all well and a lovely day. And oh, an interesting note from Caroline for Vanya. And yes, please continue your practice. Please continue supporting one another and being in Sangha. And please feel free to engage as fully and freely as you like with things today. All right, I will perhaps see you tomorrow.